Okay, thank you very much, Jerry. That was a great presentation. And what I'm going to do is basically support what you said and with some details. I'll ask this rhetorical question: to V or not to V? That is the question. Because back in March of this year, there were some forecasters who said this would be a V recovery. A second stroke of the V would be sharp recovery, and some still say that. So I haven't turned on my slideshow. Sorry. So I intend to try to answer these questions: which sectors are actually experiencing the hope for a V shape, and which have not, and why, and what comes next? And is the data so far compatible with the forecast that Jared just gave us? So here's a story of a V. A classroom light goes out, the classroom ends, the light comes back on, and everything goes back to normal. That's a switch toward V. But in reality, what we're experiencing, the light goes out, the classroom goes out, and what comes back is something totally different. And that creates a different kind of recovery than a V shape, one of many things that creates a different form of recovery. So I asked this question: what will bend the second stroke of the V? One possibility that Jerry's already mentioned is that COVID-19 is not really going to go away anytime soon. Even if there's an FDA approved vaccine, that's not going to cure my wariness. I'm going to be concerned going forward until the evidence indicates that this is nothing more than the flu. And I asked the rhetorical question: are you planning a cruise next month? I know some of you have booked it for next year, but I bet you have the option of saying no when the bad news arrives with regard to COVID-19. We've had these enterprises. You drive up and down the streets of Los Angeles, there's so many retail locations that are shut down. That's going to take time for those to recover for sure. The employment contracts they're like marriages where the employer and employee learn what's best about each other. And when those are terminated, the longer they're terminated, the harder it is to reestablish or to recreate. And then, as I already mentioned with regard to college work, the COVID-19 has changed the delivery of goods, education, advice, intellectual work. Here's what faculty have to worry about: that college professors will lose their jobs, and they won't get another job because they'll spend a lot of time looking before they settle on their next job driving at Uber. That's supposed to be a little humor, but it's hard for me to see the laughter that's you're emitting at this point. So when do you do a fiscal stimulus? A fiscal stimulus is intended to cure a demand-constrained economy by increasing demand. We don't have a demand-constrained economy. We have a virus-constrained economy. And the CARES Act acted as has been sold as if it was a fiscal stimulus. So it wasn't that at all. It was just maintaining income levels. And the fiscal stimulus should come next when the COVID releases its grip on us. But with trillions already spent, the opposite's going to happen. Instead of a fiscal stimulus, we're going to have a fiscal takeaway, and it's going to make the recovery all the longer. And it's a huge error in my mind with regard to the packages that were set in place. Those should not have been stimulus. Those should have been tax-based spending, and later on do the spending without the taxes. Here's a V and a lazy V. Here's a lazy V with retail sales, food services and drinking places. You're supposed to think about the contact that occurs in bars and restaurants and how we had 53% loss in that sector. And we started getting them back, but now it's flattening out. Whereas the rest of retail sales, including the Amazon type sales, that's now above. It's more than recovered the 2019 averages. So we had part of retail sales are being affected by the COVID, and a part don't seem to be much affected. And why? There's Amazon up in the upper right. Here's an L of an outcome, not a V. This is TSA checkpoint counts. So imagine you were an airline and you're currently at about 30% of last year's level of customers. That's pretty tough. What the heck are you going to do? And with airlines are going to be laying off. So that's definitely not a V, isn't it? A sector that definitely doesn't have a V isn't going to have a V. So here's another look at the payroll, employment, and the forecast that Jerry talked about. This is an image that illustrates the expansions beginning at the cycle peak, and you move across the bottom at toward the right. That's months after the cycle peak, and what's displayed is each one of these expansions dated by their cycle peak. So the last one was February 20. That was the cycle peak. That's the one over here on the left. But what I want to show you is I display this data not till the end of the expansion, but until the jobs have come back. And you can see that in most of these expansions, expansions, the jobs came back within a 24-month period. The 1990 was a bit more delayed. It took 2.5 years. 2001, it took almost 3 years. And 2007 took 6.5, almost 7 years. Very sluggish. What's the story with regard to the current situation? If we had a V, that April and May would have continued to lead upward, and we would already have recovered the employment. You can see the actuals bent down a little bit, and this is the forecast, which is ends up a bit more delayed than 1990. It could be worse, and as Jerry has mentioned, it's ultimately COVID-19. It's not Governor Newsom that is going to be in control and decide what happens in 2022 and 2023. That's going to be the COVID-19 and your and my reaction to the risks that come with COVID-19. So goods and services, it's never been more important to understand that there's a difference between goods and services. A good can be dropped off at your front door and delivered with no human contact. It can avoid the COVID-19 risk. While most services are delivered face-to-face or closer, there are some services that come with wires, pipes, and wireless too, free of any direct human contact. And there's an incentive to transfer the face-to-face or closer services to wires, pipes, or wireless. So that's kind of what we're doing on the education level to avoid that direct contact. Now, it's interesting that governments, consumers, are focusing only on the final delivery, where there's a lot of contact that occur along the supply chain that needs to be worried about a lot. So we focus, you and I focus on grocery stores, but not at all on meat packing plants. We need to do the whole supply chain, not just the end of it. So here's what I want to leave you with, a kind of a category, a way of thinking about the issues. And on the left-hand side of this display, I have 3 different ways of delivering services: face-to-face, touch, or crowds. And I'm going to say that these are subject to a tax rate created by the COVID-19 with a relatively small transaction cost for doing face-to-face, a larger one for touch, and a very large one for participating in crowds. On the horizontal axis is the responsiveness. So if there's an essential activity, the tax rate doesn't have a big impact on what you do. The postponable, when that tax rate is hit, particularly in the high ones, you're going to postpone that activity, but eventually there's a pent-up demand and you're going to emerge in recovery, significant recovery. Whereas avoidable is just going to continue to be avoided until the COVID-19 taxes go away. So now I've filled it in with hypothetical, and you're going to see these are actual as well as hypothetical. On the face-to-face row, the essential thing is grocery shopping. The postponable items are clothes shopping, and avoidable are restaurant meals. And if I have the time, you'll see that the employment levels have hardly declined in the one on the left, more in the middle, and the far right, the greatest. Touch, emergency surgery is essential. Dental work is postponable. Massage or nails are avoidable. In terms of crowd, religious meetings by many are regarded essential. Weddings are postponable. I have a niece who's postponed her wedding a year. And then there's spectator sports, which are avoidable. So let's look at some actual data. This is 2-digit data that represents the decline in payrolls for finance, insurance, and real estate from compared with February 20. And that's government, that's non-durable manufacturing, retail trade, wholesale trade, construction. I got that a little bit mixed up. I'm going to keep on going through these quickly because I can't keep track of them. But that first one, that's different. That's services, consumer, other services, and that's nail salons. And the information is interesting because it's one of the weakest in terms of August. We're going to take another look at that in a minute. This is mining, which has been on the decline through all 2019 and continues. And there's the extreme one, leisure and hospitality. So just so you know how extreme that is, this is the same kind of image that we had before, but now we have the displays of leisure and hospitality during these expansions. And this display again ends when we get back to the employment levels that we had at the previous peak. So you can see that leisure and hospitality has always been a locomotive pulling us forward, because while the total payrolls were below the previous peak, these are above and pulling us forward. If you take all the same data and put it in an image that allows us to see the most recent data, you can hardly see the image. That shows you how weird and extreme the situation is, with a 50% decline in leisure and hospitality. Well, I mentioned the information sector, and most of information, publishing, data processing, telecommunications have relatively mild decline. Motion picture and sound recording industries have dropped dramatically. This is not the theaters themselves, but it's the theaters where the crowds meet, and you and I are not going to movies. So there's been a big decline in jobs in that sector. Here's the sectors with the biggest decline in payrolls. And I hope you have these images that you can have spend some time looking over the details, but I put a box over the ones that are the biggest: motion picture, performing arts, scenic, sightseeing, accommodation, that's hotels, arts. These are all crowd activities. So it's the crowds where the biggest impact has been. These are the sectors that have the smallest percentage changes. And the one that I want to bring out is food and beverage stores. Up there at the top, you have general merchandise stores, and you have couriers and messengers. That's the delivery, the new method of delivering the goods. Instead of you going to the retail store, they'll bring it to your home. Here's the recoveries that are 80% or more, very strong recoveries. Up at the top are the ones that had that were actually above where we were before. This is the strongest recoveries, the offices of dentists, the postponal of items. They have had a very strong recoveries. Department stores, residential building, residential building, that's construction that Jerry mentioned, very strong. And then that's non-retail, non-store retailers, that's Amazon is doing well. So here's the 0% recoveries. Travel and arrangement, these are ones where you're not getting a V, but you're getting an L. It's just sort of flat across the horizontal. That's travel and arrangements. That's water, transportation. Mining and logging, I said, is different. It's not COVID-19. It's oil prices. That's the problem. The next one is rail transportation. Nursing and residential care is in there as well. So I don't really have time to go through each one of those in detail, but what I want to leave you with is this display, which indicates that there are still wide open and still struggling sectors. Now I've color coded this in terms of where we are with the recovery. And the green means everything is, the solid greens, up in the upper left with grocery shopping means everything's perfect. The light green is almost so. Clothes shopping, dental work, and emergent surgery. The light red means those things are not back where they are, but they're a very significant bounce back. And then at the lower right are the touch nail salons and spectator sports. UCLA football is now opening up. We'll see how that works out. But those in the lower right are going to continue to be a problem unless we get the COVID-19 under control. And the control, in my mind, is not the vaccine, but the therapy. Because I want to know, if I get that COVID-19, is there some treatment that will prevent me from living forever with a terrible outcome and/or not living at all? Thank you very much. I turn this over back to Jerry, or I guess to William. Oh, that's my comment. Please stop shouting V1. Stop shouting V. It's not going to happen.
Thank you, Ed. I think now let's find out what's happening in California. So